If a sales rep is closing deals, should we really care what's going on in the background? Does their time working the phones, sending emails, or posting on social media matter all that much? When and where should sales managers get involved? And when should we just let the ends justify the means? Marketing and sales are full of myths, misconceptions, and even flat-out lies. So join us as we push the echo chamber aside and talk about hands-on and hands-off sales management.
Hello, and welcome to the Rethink Marketing Podcast. I'm Nick Smith, joined by the advocate for appropriate admonishment, Mr. Marketing himself, Colin Jeffries.
The advocate, I think I like that. That has a lot of really positive connotations to it.
I like the admonishment part was my favorite part of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, Nick, how are you today? What's going on?
Oh, man, I'm doing fantastic, Colin. How are you?
Oh, marvelous. I'm excited to kind of dive into today's topic because it seems like there are so many sales systems that demand that sales leaders really step up and lead and coach and have a really hands-on, almost a micromanagement approach. But then on the opposite side, we see a lot of highly successful, what I'll call mavericks, that don't really adhere to a system, that really push back when they get that commendation that they really need to go in and enter more stuff into the CRM, right? And so just diving into when is hands-on really, really good and when is hands-off better?
Oh, I love this topic. I totally agree with you on this because, I have been in so many different sales organizations where I've seen sales leaders really give people the very prescriptive way of doing things. And sometimes I've seen it work really well. And then other times it's like, hey, you've got this one-star performer, that maverick, as you pointed out, and by holding them accountable to some really specific, activity metrics, what happens is you're taking all the creativity out of their process, and then they end up, first of all, they end up getting frustrated, and then the results actually diminish. So in that situation, it might not be helpful.
That's exactly right. And I don't really care who you are or what your job position looks like. If you're really frustrated, if you feel like you're being micromanaged, if you get the sense that your autonomy is being taken away or constricted, it's really hard to perform at the same level as when you are trusted, when you are respected, and when you're kind of left alone.
I totally agree. It reminds me of Daniel Pink, right? So if we're talking about sales, you got to talk about Daniel Pink, who says, hey, to sell is human. His other book, Drive, he talks about motivation. And in that book, he says, hey, there's really 3 key factors for motivation. And when you're micromanaging people, you're taking these away. And the factors are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So, micromanaging, you're getting rid of autonomy. Mastery is you have to have that ability to go out there and do something over time and get better at it. And then purpose, if you're just punching a clock, if you're doing the same things every single day, you don't really feel like you have a great purpose, you have this impact, right? So I think it demotivates people to micromanage them.
I agree completely. I'll kind of segment this into 2 pillars, if you will, because I agree exactly with what you're saying. And I'll say the first one is, call it let them play. And to your point, if the team has that autonomy, if they do have that mastery, if they don't require a lot of coaching or hand-holding, if they're hitting their numbers, if morale is high, if closing rates are high, then it's okay to take a step back as a manager and let the team go and let them kind of run. One really important factor in that, though, is making sure that success is very clearly defined. Because as salespeople, as marketing people, sometimes success looks like a massive increase in web traffic, but sometimes it looks like conversion rate optimization. Sometimes it looks like really, really high closing rates, but sometimes it looks like high NPS scores or low cancellation rates or something of that nature. As long as everybody on the team has access to the same, what I'll call funnel filling activities, and we're not letting one person go do something vastly different or another person have access to some trial system that other people don't have access to, it really seems like it's fine to let those teams go off on their own and play ball, so to speak. Anything you'd add to that, Nick, before I talk about when to step in?
Well, I think I'm probably going to segue into your next pillar here, because the devil's advocate to that is it duplicable, right? So yes, if you have success very well defined and we're achieving that success and we're not creating other issues, then that's great. But one of the biggest things I see is, and this is, I think a lot of the times it's like, hey, you have a sales leader who oftentimes came up through sales and they learned one particular way or maybe two particular ways of doing something. And so now they think this is the way that it's done. And what will happen is they'll try and train their team to follow these specific steps. And they think, okay, well, this is what I know how to duplicate. So the challenge with that, though, is sometimes you have something that is duplicable, like, hey, going out there and social selling. Lots of people have figured out how to duplicate that, but it's very different than what many of our sales leaders went through back in the day. Maybe they're not digital natives. Maybe they haven't grown up with social media. And so they think, I don't know how the heck to duplicate that. I can't get this maverick to teach the rest of my team. And so let's throw the baby out with the bathwater.
And that's when a lot of constriction or restriction occurs, because the manager sees one maverick really crushing it and they see everybody else really struggling. I love that point about, is it scalable, I'll say. Can one person take it and teach another person how to do it, teaching them to fish versus giving them a fish, so to speak? I think that's really insightful. The other thing that I'll add on to that, and I think really feeds into it, Nick, is sometimes success metrics are unclear, and that can require more hands-on management, not necessarily ride-alongs and role-playing and other classic sales development techniques, but more what I would consider is just general coaching and guidance. Oftentimes, salespeople think, I'm not getting my numbers in the CRM, I'm not working the phones enough, I'm not sending out enough emails, and they see those as these success metrics, when in reality, maybe these success metrics are closing rate, cancellation rate, average ticket size, just pure revenue, right? And so coming alongside of that person who may or may not really understand the success metric can be important, and especially if that falls on the entire team. If you think that closing rate is the most important metric, and I think that revenue is the most important metric, and our third companion over there thinks that cancellation rates are the most important metric, we're all going to manage our book of business very differently.
I totally agree with you. And I think this brings up another reason why some of that micromanagement comes into play, because a lot of managers, I think that what happens is they've been taught in management, what you do is you control activities. You can't control outcomes, because outcomes are the result of activities, right? And so management thinks, okay, well, I need to have some sort of a leading indicator, some sort of an activity metric that I can manage, almost like a manufacturing line, right? Like, I know if I manage my cycle times, if I manage the amount of inputs, like all that, then I'm going to get this many outputs. Well, sales doesn't necessarily work that way. It can work that way in some cases. But the challenge with that is now they say, okay, everybody has to make 200 calls today, or everybody has to send this many emails. And what happens in that situation is people will start to game the system.
Exactly.
Right? Especially those mavericks who, maybe they're like, you know what, this system isn't really what's producing my results. I have my own system over here, or my own process that I follow. And so, but now I'm being held to hit these kind of arbitrary activity numbers. So what am I going to do? I'm going to do the thing that's going to help me hit these numbers as fast as possible, whether or not it produces results. So I'm just going to pick up the phone and call the movie theater 200 times a day. And then I'm going to go actually do my job. Right. So that can be a big downside, right? If you're holding people to that, they can just start gaming the system and then the results go down.
That's an excellent point. At a younger point in my career, I was co-managing a sales team, and it was very interesting because one of the key success metrics that everyone thought it mattered a lot was closing rate. And so what we had happen is a few of the intelligent sales reps would go out and they would run off-book appointments. So they would have somebody that called their cell because they saw some content or what have you. They would run that appointment, they'd do the sit, and if they closed it, they would put it in the CRM and they would qualify it as a close. If they didn't, they would just follow up with that person off the books. And so they would use that to pad their closing rate because they thought closing rate mattered so much. And I think what you're saying is exactly on point with how we manage those teams, is really making sure that everybody's sort of swimming in the right direction, that they have the right autonomy, and that they're not doing pointless activities, or they're not doing off book or call it manipulative activities to try to screw with some number.
That's classic. I've seen that so many times where, that off book activity, that's where something, people will also manage sales stages.
Yes.
And so you'll see a deal that goes from like initial discovery to close in like 13 minutes. And you're like, somebody was doing something off the books here. But yeah, I think another thing that managers do is they try, I think good managers realize that what you're supposed to do is you don't necessarily manage every person completely the same. You give them the same framework and you give them a little bit of flexibility to operate within that framework, but everybody's sales style might be a little bit different. And so when you manage everybody completely the same, what happens is you're negating some of the strengths of certain people, and then you're really reinforcing the strengths of other people. And so you have uneven performance. And so I think a good leader recognizes what is it that's unique, what is it that's special about all of the different people on their team. How do we promote that and help them play to their strengths and then subordinate their weaknesses?
That's a really good point too. I think the classic salesperson generally is high level, they're visionary, they're connected, they're communicative. They may not necessarily be the accountant type who is really into the minutia and the details. So exactly what you're saying, if we can give them a customer success representative or something of that nature, an account manager that can take those details on and let the salesperson go sell, maybe that falls on the sales leader, maybe that falls on some support person. But I think exactly what you're saying, is exactly accurate, Nick, where let people play to their strengths and then maybe coach around those weaknesses if we need to.
This is such a great topic. I think it's one of those situations where it's a double-edged sword because, you could have a situation where it makes sense to let people play, and we've covered a lot of those different variables, but it also, it's kind of fighting human nature, right? People want to be in control. And so when you have people who are out there running their own system, maybe you feel like a little bit like you're less in control. So that can definitely be a challenge. Colin, this has been a fantastic conversation talking about all of the different ways that we can work together when it makes sense to have leadership step in and play more of an integral role in managing people versus when to give people more autonomy. Is there anything you would add to this conversation?
Nick, the only thing that I would add, and this is applicable to marketing teams, to sales teams, to operations teams, really anybody that is trying to run a micro culture within a larger organization culture. And that is, it's very difficult to have a healthy and strong sales team culture if the culture of the entire organization is pretty toxic. So just recognizing when is it appropriate for sales leaders to try to change and drive sales culture, and when does that have to come from the executive suite because it's a massive organization culture problem. But like you said, great conversation today. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions. I used to believe a lot of myths that hinder marketing.
And I bought into the classic misconceptions haunting sales.
Join us as we escape the echo chamber each week to shed some light on how to interpret sales and marketing myths.
Can't wait until next week for another episode? Visit rethinkmarketingpodcast.com to listen to our archives, connect with us, or request your very own limited edition Rethink Marketing t-shirt.
Until next time, keep rethinking those common assumptions.